Welcome to the second part in my series on building a nuclear fusor. So this part is going to be on the construction of the fusor chamber. And right now I am putting the four threaded rods through the bottom flange, and I'm going to glue it to this little bit of plexiglass that I've cut out in a circle to act as the base. So the standoffs or the spacers that I'm using, I think it's pretty ingenious. I used some mechanical pencils and I cut them to be 2 inches long, and I just cut the fuselage out, and those are my nylon spacers. They fit really nicely over the rods. And I'm just using some hot glue. Later I had to use epoxy because the hot glue is just too weak, but yeah. Now I'm cutting out some O-ring gaskets for the vacuum chamber, and these will go between the glass tube and the metal flange and give it really good contact. I'll use some high vacuum grease to make sure that it's an airtight seal. And this is the finished, or one of the finished rings here. It's pretty sturdy. So now I'm applying the high vacuum grease to the silicone seal ring, and I'm wearing gloves just because this stuff is really sticky. And the design is one of these rings goes on top of the bottom flange, and then the glass tube goes on top of that, and then another ring seal goes on top of the glass tube, and the top flange is on top of that. Now I am installing the borosilicate glass tube. Now I've cleaned it already with alcohol and a shop towel. I've actually cleaned both of the metal flanges, or at least the bottom flange, with alcohol. And this is just to make sure there's no particles in the chamber that could compromise the vacuum. So here I'm going to wipe down the top flange with some alcohol, and then I'll pop it on top, and then it'll be ready to just tighten down. A quick side rant about tightening down that top flange. So the way that I intended to tighten it down was by putting 4 hex nuts on the threaded rods and tightening them down, and this would compress the entire chamber together and deform the rubber rings, keeping good contact. The only issue was when I tried this, the threaded rods simply moved out of the spacers and were raised outside of the structure. So that was a pretty big issue. And I just got around it by putting a little bit of epoxy resin where the threads meet the top and bottom flange. And that seemed to do the trick. I was able to tighten down the hex nuts, and I'll show a picture of what I did in a bit here. Boom. So here is the chamber with the epoxy resin that I talked about earlier. You see I've got it in the holes that the thread rods go through on the bottom flange, and once that sets, it'll prevent the thread rods from moving around, and I'll be able to tighten down those 4 hex nuts on the top. In retrospect, it probably would have been better to use some thread lock inside of those spacers that I have to keep the rods moving around, because now if I ever want to deassemble this chamber, I'll have to like saw off those threaded rods. But this method does work, but there was probably a better way to do it.